Hi, guys. Welcome back to the channel. We're live from Los Angeles. This is your host, Lord Hellespont V, your favorite pseudo intellectual. I'm feeling good today. What a great day. I want to talk about watches. And today we're going to focus on the histories and stories that bring these timepieces to us, the heritage that a wristwatch carries, and whether that matters to you at all. When you choose a watch, when you choose to wear a watch, do you actually care about the heritage of the brand? Do you care about the history behind the brand, the history behind the type of the watch? Do you exclusively wear watches that are connected to aviation history? Do you wear watches that are the connected to the sea? Do you wear watches that are exclusively sports watches? Or do you care about the kind of personal connection or personal history that you have with a particular timepiece? Are you obsessed with a certain watch because it's what your cool uncle used to wear? Do you like a watch because it used to be your father's watch? Or do you care about the particular horological heritage that a brand carries forward in terms of innovation, in terms of finishing, in terms of other aspects of artisanship that go into making watches? We're going to talk about all of this today and more. And I'm going to start with thinking a little bit about the history of the Explorer, the entire line, really, but kind of tie it back into what I really like about my Explorer 2. And it really checks more than one box for me. First of all, as you might know, the Rolex Explorer line has a mid 20th century history. Um, it emerged as a model. It came into its own as its separate independent line in 1953. And that was in the aftermath of the successful ascent of 1953 British expedition to Mount Everest. And that, of course, finally culminated in the successful ascent of Tenzing Norgay and Edmund Hillary. Um, so Rolex, that had already equipped the entire expedition team with Oyster Perpetuals, decided to capitalize on this success, decided to commemorate this success, and decided to really make the best of this remarkable achievement in exploration. And that's how the first reference of the Rolex Explorer came about. I just want to say hi to my friend Dirk Diggler here. It's so nice to see you, man. Lovely to see you. So, in the wake of the successful Tenzing Norgay Edmund Hillary expedition, Rolex came out with its line of explorers, and the first independent reference was 6350, even though there are references, as is usually the case with Rolex. There's always an exception to the rule, always an exception to an established fact that unsettles it somehow. There are also reference 6150s that are sometimes labeled Explorer rather than Precision, but it was the reference 6350 that came out as its independent line to capitalize on the successful ascent of the 1953 expedition that came to commemorate that particular achievement in exploration. So the origin story of the Rolex Explorer, much like many other models by the vaunted brand, is a fascinating blend of mythology and history. Most enthusiasts know that the beginnings of the model are tied to the Mount Everest expedition of 1953, when Tenzing Norgay and Edmund Hillary became the first two people to reach the summit. But the Explorer per se did not even exist at the time of the ascent. Rolex had indeed equipped the expedition with Oyster Perpetuals and ingeniously employed the successful ascent almost immediately with the release of the first proper generation of its explorers, with reference 6350. A much humbler Rolex Oyster, which you know is the first waterproof wristwatch, right? The one that accompanied, for example, Mercedes Gleitze in her swim across the channel, hanging on her neck on a necklace. So a Rolex Oyster had already accompanied the first flight over Mount Everest in 1933 with the Houston Everest expedition, and of course, a later explorer, reference 1016, was to accompany Ian Fleming at his writing desk and for much of the rest of his life. But that's a story for another day. In this ad, you see here where the copy says, we built the Rolex Explorer because there isn't any watch repair shop on top of the Matterhorn. The writing evokes those rugged origins of the model connected to the Everest ascent, also in detail here, where a Rolex watch was simply considered part of the equipment, i.e., a tool watch, even as it emphasizes the brand's own provenance by naming Matterhorn, an alpine peak between Switzerland and Italy, and one of the highest summits in Europe. Hey guys, messaging matters. Good topic for the non-flexers. Alan, welcome to the channel. So nice to see you. Legend says Smith's was actually the first watch to summit Everest, but Rolex was the better marketing machine. That's absolutely correct. That's absolutely correct because the team was supplied with both Rolex Oyster Perpetuals and Smiths. So chances are Smiths may have made it first to the summit before the Oyster Perpetuals. But one thing we know for sure, even though the story is intimately entwined, that Rolex Explorer as such did not exist at the time of the expedition and was not actually at the scene, but it was the marketing department of Rolex that capitalized on that momentous achievement. GB Vol, welcome to the channel. Matterhorn. Joe Money, welcome, man. Welcome to the Horological Smooth Talk Radio with Lord Hellespont. Hey, I like that name. Can I adopt it? Maybe I'll change the name again just to, find another way to undermine myself. Messaging Matters says compare that Matterhorn ad to a Rolex ad today. I'm not even sure if Rolex is trying at this point in time, but hey, I have been harping on that for a while. So let's just enjoy what we have in these vintage ads. So the reference actually in this ad, which comes from a later period in time, is to Matterhorn and not necessarily to Mount Everest. Even though, of course, that is the elephant in the room, right? That is, of course, suspended in the background. Finally, the ad also gives us a hint of the range of options available for Rolex watches at the point of retail, where at the time the authentic bracelet was merely optional, right? And this is what it says: the Explorer sells for $180, and with the authentic Rolex bracelet, 195. And then it continues to say, and there are other officially certified chronometers by Rolex that sell for $175. Interesting amounts, of course. We do know they belong to another time, but even with the adjusted inflation, those are necessarily tool watch prices, not the luxury prices that Rolex is charging, or at least attempting to charge its customer. Um, and of course, that is even less than the amount that these models go for in the secondary market, in the so-called gray market. And that idea that the bracelet is optional, I think, accounts for the modularity of this timepiece as a tool watch, right? Those Holst case, famous Holst case of vintage Rolex watches, where you can simply pop out the bracelet with the help of a toothpick. And of course, for the dazzling variety of configurations that exist in the secondary market for vintage Rolex watches today. And that's the other point, right? Sometimes we see, for example, watches that we are accustomed to see with an oyster bracelet, such as the Explorer, on a Jubilee. And one wonders why, right? Was that an aftermarket bracelet? Was that an aftermarket replacement? Did someone tinker with the watch? Possibly not, right? Because the idea was that these watches were offered at retail to you with a variety of options. You could get them on a leather band. You could get them in any particular configuration you like. You could get them on a Jubilee bracelet, on an oyster bracelet, uh, and the world was your oyster. No pun intended. So sometimes it's helpful to think about these things a little bit, and it also, I think, goes to show in a way when you have um, a close correspondence between the code of the bracelet, which gives you the year in which it was produced, and the serial number, which also gives you roughly the year in which the watch was produced, the watch was assembled. And they're not always the exact same year, right? They're usually from the same 1-2 year period. And this is exactly why, because at the end of the day, um, there were much less rules, much less in terms of restrictions, and customer was really the king. They actually cared about their customer. GB Vol says it looks like an in-flight magazine ad. I guess that's one place where we still have watch-related advertisement. Um, Joe Money says, "True, Dirk. James Bond didn't walk into an AD. Hey, he only asked. He only had to ask Q. Didn't walk into an AD wondering which piece would be a better investment." Dirk Diggler says, "Back in the day, men were not afraid to scratch their Rolexes." Hey, there are still people, men and women, who are not afraid to do that. I'll count myself in that group. Alan says, "What a difference time makes, huh?" Nowadays, we have bezel protectors for our tool watches. Hmm. I met a collector on one of these panels who had used this particular kit to sticker up the entirety of his luxury sports watch, and I had to ask him why. Right, I did understand his anxieties, his hesitations, because he had gotten this watch when it when the world was a little more sane, when it was trending right around at its retail value. he bought the watch at retail, and now it's multiple times that. And of course, he ended up not wearing it at all. So that was a way for him to actually wear and use the damn watch. But why not just do it? Right. And this was a person of means, of course, right? It's not like that was his one and only, where he had to truly treasure it. But then again, when people have that one watch that they really treasure, it accompanies them anywhere and everywhere, and they don't usually care much about a ding or a scratch here and there. Messaging Matters says the ad is from 1966. I just checked inflation since then. $1 then, 902 now. Thus, based on inflation, the watch would cost $1623.60 today. 1759 on a bracelet. And let me just say, that's not what a Rolex Explorer lists for today. And that's quite easy for us to actually call up. And it's an interesting exercise, right? We are not particularly raising any profound questions with that. But today, of course, the counterpart of the same model, which is 124270, right, instead of a 1016, lists for $7,200. And this is, in a way, one of the best values today, especially at retail, in the entire Rolex lineup. The Explorer in 36 millimeter is at once both a real tool watch with some significant history behind it, and also because of its pared down minimalistic look, it can also be worn on all kinds of occasions that may otherwise demand a more formal, a dressier watch. The Explorer can actually do that, right? And that's, again, I said it's a story for another day, but whenever this comes up, I always feel like I need to bring up my man, Ian Fleming, right, who obviously wore it when he was, as you can see, throwing knives in his favorite casual shirt, but also on occasions where he poured himself a drink and went out on a wild night with a dinner jacket. And of course, whenever he sat down to write as well. One dog, one bone, as they say. And that was Ian Fleming and his 1016. Alan Gildo says, plastic wrap. I work with a guy who wears a Hulk with a plastic condom on it. Nice analogy. Ridiculous. He's a keyboard warrior. Hey, the internet is full of those. Alan Gildo, Meech. I've spent the last 2 hours eyeballing Omega Seamaster 2531 dots. 80. That's one of my favorite models of Omega ever. I know, again, in the internet, I might not make many friends by saying that, because, as you know, everyone has to own a Speedmaster, and the ultimate Omega has to be the Moonwatch. But for me, this is where it's at. Right? The first Omega Bond watch in its automatic in its execution with the automatic movement, smaller proportions than it is today, perhaps more wearable. What is to me a much nicer wave dial because it's done by guilloche rather than laser engraving, a much more discreet helium escape valve that gives it a more uniform look, and of course, an aluminum bezel that ages properly, showing the actual wear and tear and the weight of all the memories that you end up making with a watch like this. It's a watch that's meant to be worn and enjoyed. That's what an Omega Seamaster 300M Professional is. And this is a beautiful reference that you can score under 3K US dollars easily in a decent condition. And GB Vol reminds us Sir Ian Fleming. Yeah, Ian Fleming is I think in many ways underrated, if I may say that. I'll go to another one now. This is from the 70s. And we can kind of see Rolex already getting lazier, right? Look at this masterful copy. The great strength of a Rolex is strength. Took you a long time to figure that one. Um, I'm sure they really hurt their brains coming up with that particular sentence. But once again, you know, when the product speaks for itself, and when you can pair it up with such an icon as Jean-Claude Killy, who was a triple Olympic champion, skier, among other things, as they say here, racing driver, flyer, movie maker, manufacturer, entrepreneur. And it says handcrafted timepiece designed for survival in extreme environments. Again, of course, there are no hands really involved in the production of a Rolex today, when the brand produces about 1 million watches every year. But this was a different time. The hands, Jean-Claude Killy, the watch, Rolex. And this is, of course, the successor, without replacing, of course, the original Explorer, which remained in the line as in its simplistic beauty. And Explorer 2 entered the frame as the oddball, as the avant-garde, as the ugly duckling. And in a way, the Explorer 2 in today's lineup, too, it sticks out in a certain way, and I would say in a good way. But we will get to talk about that in a little bit. So reference 1655, this is Freccione, right? The little arrow. Here's another icon from the archive of the crown that has been getting well-deserved attention of late, in no small part due to the not-so-subtle nod Tudor gave the design with one of their most recent releases, the Black Bay Pro. Even though the Explorer 2 has always been an oddball within Rolex's professional line, right, their lineup of sports watches, it's also had its unique charm from the very beginning. How else would one explain the association of the watch with Steve McQueen, right? That's another nickname for this model, without a hint of evidence that the King of Cool actually wore the watch. The ad, of course, confuses the matters a little more by featuring the watch on the legendary skier, triple Olympic champion Jean-Claude Killy, since Killy in collector speak refers to the Dato Compax chronograph, the triple calendar chronograph that existed as a series of references in rather limited production numbers. That's another sort of grail among many vintage collectors, right? And we can take a quick look at that watch as well. And the funny thing is, of course, to add another um, layer into that story, Jean-Claude Killy himself, even though it's said that he owned one of those triple calendar chronograph watches, is himself never actually pictured wearing that watch. So, another mystery right there. But Explorer 2, in its various iterations, 7 marks altogether, with a few variations on the bezel. Reference 1655 remained in production from 1971 to 1984 or 1985, and it remains today itself a grail for many and one of the fail-safe methods of spotting a vintage Rolex collector in public. Right? Of course, you can see any number of watches on people's wrists, and you can never quite tell what their connection to that watch is and what their connection is to the world of wristwatches. But you see someone wearing a 1655, and that's a watch guy, right? It's hard to mistake it for anything else. Thomas says today's 36 millimeter Explorer. Why? Always ask why, and who the why serves, and then whether that is acceptable. Please elaborate, Thomas. I would love to hear what you think of that. I think again, it stands in many ways the Explorer in today's lineup, in terms of its proportions, in terms of its simplicity. Um, it really stands apart, and in a good way, because those proportions make it, I think, a much more versatile watch that can be worn uh, out there in the field, uh, out there when you're exploring, out there when you're hiking, climbing, um, horsing about, but also uh, when you put your favorite outfit and go out in the night. It's a watch that you don't have to take off. You don't have to change it for something else if you want to wear a watch to that special occasion. And the Explorer can go seamlessly from one to the next. And the essence of water is liquid, right? The strength of Rolex is strength, and the sky is blue. This ad may not be the finest hour of Rolex's marketing department, but I have once said to my friend Watch Nicholas that nothing else matters much when the product speaks for itself. The hands, Jean-Claude Killy; the watch, Rolex. And this, I think, is the ad for me that kind of brings all these elements of Rolex's advertising strategy at the time really together. Um, and I've tried to explain this in a way here in this little write up. But I'm also gonna make a short video about it so I can have a condensed narrative about it there as well. And this is about the Sea Dweller, the double red, 1665. And it focuses on the commercial divers that belong to the company with the name Comex. That is itself, of course, a name that appears on some of the most collectible vintage Rolex watches that hit the auction circuit. When Comex dives to 2,000 feet, Rolex Engineering earns the right to be with them. In the post Ralph Lauren age of lifestyle branding for luxury products, the importance of storytelling is often taken for granted. But before Uncle Ralph established this golden standard, Rolex was on the vanguard in inviting their potential customers to imagine their wristwatch beyond a timepiece, indeed beyond a tool. A Rolex watch was not merely as an implement, was not merely an implement designed for a particular purpose, but also a dream machine that enhances their life and style, the life and style of the customer. Right? Because the first part could actually be taken for granted in the mid 60s and 70s that this was a tool watch first, but it was more. This particular ad shows just how innovative Rolex was in this particular marketing scheme, since they managed to add yet another dimension to its field of association. If lifestyle marketing aims to compel the customer to identify with the possibly antiquated, superseded, if not entirely exhausted, work oriented use of the commodity at hand, here Rolex identifies the largely manual labor of their craftsmen with the work the professional divers perform in deep waters using the fruits of their labor. Um, Again, I talked about this in another context before, but the idea is that we are obsessed with tool watches at this point in time in 21st century precisely because they don't serve that utilitarian purpose for which they're initially designed, right? And that inspires a certain kind of nostalgia that in fact doesn't take away, but in fact um, solidifies the emotional bond between you as a consumer and the wristwatch as a commodity, as a product. JB, hey man, how are you doing? Nice to see you. And the reason I said here Rolex is adding another dimension is because at the beginning they say that Rolex engineering has to earn the right to be with these deep sea divers, with these uh, deep sea explorers, right? But in fact, by the end of that page-long narrative they have come up with this for this particular advertisement, they actually turn the tables because they're saying the handcrafted Rolex Oyster case, its perpetual self-winding movement, and its specially designed bracelet are the reasons why hundreds of Comex divers will wear and depend upon Rolex line of diving watches. Comex divers and other professionals, as well as sports divers, will depend upon and get a great deal of personal satisfaction out of owning a Rolex. Right? So it puts you in the place of those professional divers, but it also puts you in a way in the mindset, looking over the shoulder at the very least, of the actual people who are designing this watch, who are assembling it, who are producing it. So those divers and sportsmen will get a great deal of personal satisfaction out of owning a Rolex, almost as much as our craftsmen get out of building one. Owning a Rolex is almost as satisfying as making one. So you have an ad here that puts you not only in the place of the professional professional explorers, right, adventurers who use their watches and who are proud and happy about owning them. The ad also puts you in the place of the craftsmen, of the artisans who are making them. And of course, there's a little analogy there that that talks about the oyster case, as if it was itself a submarine, right? Screwed down onto the oyster case is the patented Rolex winding crown, which is internally sealed for extra protection, rather like a submarine hatch. By the end of the narrative, the tables are turned. We are told owning a Rolex is as satisfying as making one. The work of the artisan is privileged once again as the primary source of value from which everything else derives. And no wonder, of course, right? Rolex can't take pride in the handwork at this point of artisans because there are barely any hands involved. Which, of course, the artisanship is today a commonplace of lifestyle marketing for which Rolex was one of the pioneers. And that's something that now some of the independent watchmakers and some of the more boutique serial watchmakers that produce less than 10,000 watches will take pride in that measure of handcraft and artisanship that goes into the making of their watches. So Thomas is elaborating on his point for the Explorer. The 39 millimeter Explorer was the unique size. It's the right size for a watch, demonstrated in the Trinity. I don't believe in the right size for watches, Thomas. The right size is whatever fits well on your wrist, whatever fits you in terms of your larger proportions, of your limbs, of your body, of your frame, and whatever size makes you feel good. Pause. Copied by the sister brand Tudor, except the face of the 39 millimeter Rolex has a better field of view. It might be. I mean, if you prefer the 39, can't blame you for that. Alan says, I've been trying to get this ladies' adventure watch, which is Explorer 36, since January. Hard to get in Canada. And Fulham John says, just to play devil's advocate, I prefer the 36 Oyster case to almost any other mechanical watch. I like the 36. I have a late 70s Datejust in 36 millimeter, and it wears really well. And to throw more conducive of all day wear, he says, by the way, lighter weights. And for those of you who are discounting certain kinds of watches for advertised size, give a try to watches that show 34 millimeter on paper, right? Like older generations of Air Kings, for example. They wear beautifully as well. If you are leaning towards smaller case diameters in general, give the 34 millimeter Air King a chance, and you'll find out soon that wears quite well as well. Messaging Matters says, so are we all Walter Mitty living vicariously through the extreme adventure associated with these watches? Desk diver. Well, I mean, that's something to think about, because there's a measure of living vicariously for sure, when you wear tool watches, especially when you genuinely baby them to the extent that you would not actually wear them when you go out to experience anything adventurous or anything that takes you outside of the box. Thomas says the best watches in history have always been 39 millimeters. And again, I don't know where this is coming from, Thomas, but good enough. Why? Rolex goofed in shrinking the Explorer to 36 millimeter. What do you mean with shrinking the Explorer to 36 millimeter? That's like saying Rolex goofed around to remove the date from Submariner. That is the original. Submariner, no date, is the original Submariner. Just like Explorer 36 millimeter is the original Explorer. And even when they introduced the 39 millimeter, the 36 was available. I do like the AP Jumbo as a size, but that actually wears larger than 39, um, for sure. Big Meat says women want more sports watches. They can fit the new 36 lady size. Actually, size is more like a 31 millimeter. The men's, yeah, Meech is on his bullshit again. Daytona is actually 38 millimeter, not 39. So come again. Full on John says, I love your Datejust. The dial is amazing. I love the older Datejust dials, the tapestry dials, the linen dial, which is mine, the silver linen dial that makes it a very monochromatic watch. I also love the Shantung, what they call the Shantung. It's there's a variety that you can find, especially in the world of vintage day dates. The kinds of dials that one comes across is truly stunning before you even dip into the newly hyped Stellas. I can see a 36 millimeter date just on a leather strap being a great everyday watch. Absolutely agree. Thomas says to messaging matters, in reference to desk divers, yes, to an extent, but get out and do, dream and do it. On Her Majesty's Secret Service escaping His Gloria, Bond surveyed his weapons. They were only his hands and feet, his Gillette razor, his wristwatch, a heavy Rolex Oyster Perpetual on an expanding metal bracelet. Mm, very cool. Of course, Rolex Oyster Perpetual is just a reference to not necessarily the model, but basically the entire line of sports, right? Because Oyster is a reference to the case, Perpetual is the reference to the self winding movement, um, right? So, an Explorer is by definition a Rolex Oyster Perpetual Explorer, just like the Submariner is Rolex Oyster Perpetual Submariner. So that doesn't necessarily settle the question that it's an OP. Messaging Matters says used properly, Rolex Oyster Perpetuals could be turned into most effective knuckle dusters. Hey, that's one way to use your Rolex watch as a tool. Not that we recommend violence on this channel. Alan Gildo says, I don't need any more excitement in my life. Yes, I mean we don't know what Alan does in his line of work. Bring on the 36 millimeter. The Rolex OP34 fits almost identical to the Explorer 36. Exactly. OP34 comes in some amazing Explorer-esque Explorer dials, right? The 369 dials. That olive green OP34 is money. And Full on John says, waiting for the 36 fluted blue motif Jubilee bracelets. 117 grams with all the links, much lighter than my no date sub at approximately 153 grams. Let's check that out, by the way, since you mentioned it so specifically. I think that's a good looking watch. So they just on a oof, so much fluff before you actually get to the watches. Blue fluted motif. And fluted bezel. There we go. This is the watch that Full on John is waiting for. I like it. I like it. And that particular dial, in a much more regulated and systematic design, of course, this fluted motif is, but it reminds me of the Shantung dials of old, um, which is named after this particular kind of silk that has a relatively rough appearance on its surface, and this is an example. Sometimes people call it mosaic as well. Um, I think it's beautiful. It's a little more irregular compared to the current um, fluted motif dials, but it has a similar vibe. The fluted motif comes closest to the appearance of these dials that are called shantung. So a kind of silk that has basically the hand of, let's say, linen, um, in terms of the feel on its surface. It's a beautiful, beautiful piece. Both of them, both the vintage one that we're looking at now and the newer Datejust, the contemporary Datejust that comes on the fluted motif dial. Alan Gildo, that's beautiful, he says. And Full On John says, that dial wasn't originally on my radar. Let's go back to that. That dial wasn't originally on my radar because I thought it would be thousands more. But once they showed me the price, I said, let's do it. I think that's a great idea. User unknown. Hey, welcome back. Greetings. Great discussion. Huge fan of a 36 millimeter Datejust, although the PCLs, the polished center links, are an oversight. Shame Rolex doesn't make mini brushed bracelets anymore. I think again that has a lot to do, of course, with that transition that we have been observing between making, robust, reliable tool watches to shiny new luxury products, and the divide between these two ideas need not be so strict, right? It doesn't have to be so hermetically separated, but it seems that somewhere along the line they may have lost the plot a little bit. Messaging Matters says, Thomas, yes, get out and do, but with a G-Shock. Last time skiing, that's what I wore. Last time swimming and sailing in a foreign country, it was a Seiko Turtle. And Thomas says, I think Rolex made a pragmatic decision to go back to 36 millimeter Explorer. Largest population points to smaller men and women, bigger marketing and growing in Asia, not 6 foot, 200-pound Americans. Hey, most 200-pound Americans are not 6 foot. They're much, much smaller than that. Much closer to the ground, I should say. The 6 foot Americans are usually more in the range of 300 pounds, but that's another discussion altogether if we are going to generalize. Yeah, I honestly, I think the problem is not the growing markets in Asia, but people facing morbid obesity, or I'm sorry, I should say grade 3 or phase 3 obesity, I think they now call it, in much of the developed world. That's the actual problem, not people coming in smaller sizes. That's usually the healthier way. s- Thomas says, guys are living vicariously through watches. The reference was to me. Mm. I think the reference was to most of us, honestly. And I don't think that's something to be ashamed about. I think that's part of our discussion today, right? In an age where we don't need to be wearing any wristwatches, in an age where we don't need timepieces on our wrist to tell time, we need other reasons. We need other justifications. We need other stories to actually wear watches, to actually invest in these things, to actually, and by that, I don't mean financially necessarily, but putting our hearts and minds and our money into these things when we do have ways of telling time more precisely, more accurately. There needs to be something else. There needs to be something more that can be experienced through these timepieces. And that really does matter. User Unknown says Watch World struggles with size syndrome. It's also psychological. Many men won't wear under 40 millimeters, despite the size looking like a dinner plate on their wrists. Hey, it would look like a lot of 40, 42, 44 watches, if that's their advertised size, do look like dinner plates on my wrist. And honestly, I'm not ashamed of it. I will just wear something that is smaller. Um, and in a way, right, that's what vintage Rolex watches are. They're scaling right under 40 millimeters, um, pre-ceramic Rolexes for the most part. And there's something to be said about that. And Thomas has been making that point, I think, very, very well, even though I don't agree with everything that he says. Full on John says, I am 5'11", 215 pounds with a 7-point-inch wrist. A lot of information there. Sometimes I wear a 35 millimeter. Fike it. Yeah, man. If you, especially if you have a collection, there's room for watches that have different case sizes, different case shapes. Um, it only makes sense. It only makes sense. It doesn't mean that you only have to watches, only have to have sports watches that are 40 millimeters or larger in case diameter. There's no such rule, right? And if there's anyone, if there are any channels who tell you about those rules and who talk about watches or any other personal item accessory in that particular way in terms of rules and strictures, stay away. Stay away. They're really trying to make it hard for you to enjoy your watches. That's ultimately the aim. And finally, we come to a slightly more contemporary Rolex ad, this time from mid 90s. And it's again from the line of Explorers, from the line of Rolex Explorers. And this is a 16570 Rolex Explorer 2 with a polar white dial. And it focuses on the achievements of Norwegian explorer Erling Kage, who wore one of these watches on his trek on foot to the North Pole in 1990, to the South Pole 1992, 1993, and to Mount Everest in 1994. And he used those words to engrave the case back of his watch, which is another thing that we stopped doing with our watches, right? Because, oh my God, what if it tarnishes the resale value, right? What if it makes it impossible to flip them? In bitter cold, dragging everything he needed behind him, Erling Kage has trudged to both ends of the earth and then thrown in climbing Everest for good measure. You do not attempt even one of those expeditions without discarding all but the most vital equipment. Mid 90s, Rolex was still clinging to it, which is how Erling Kage's Rolex Explorer 2 came to accompany him every bruised, blistered step of the way. Subjected to hundreds of hours of independent testing before it even leaves Geneva, right now, you see how the marketing focused on and certifications rather than the handiwork which has been already left behind. This exceptionally rugged chronometer does not earn the name Explorer lightly, but then, as you have seen, neither did its intrepid wearer. And this is a story that we are less familiar with, of course. The Mount Everest expedition of 1953 and its uh, somewhat complicated, mysterious connection to the emergence of the Explorer lineup in Rolex watches is a story that's told very often, not always in fullest detail and not always with all the facts. But we don't usually hear much about how Explorer 2 itself is connected with a very specific story of uh, this sort of rugged, restless spirit of exploration that the Rolex marketing copy compels you to identify with. And I have to say, I'm not immune to these things. Um, I certainly have this Explorer 2 16570 16570 that I, of course, wear in a spirit that's farthest from exploration. But to me, this is a very valuable watch, personally speaking, especially as I appear in front of you today to talk to you about watches on YouTube. Um, when I was in the market for a Rolex watch in late late 2014, 2015, I was specifically looking for a Rolex sports watch, but had not really made up my mind as to what I should be getting. And I just basically typed up a few things in YouTube and came across this rather unhinged but positively gregarious and engaging man from Brisbane, Australia, who was harping on two things: Polar Explorer 2 as the ultimate sports watch, and the Omega Speedmaster as the chronograph to own. And I was at the time not really enamored with chronographs necessarily. and I was pretty set that I wanted to get a Rolex. And I actually realized that this is one of the best deals in the market. It still is, by the way, the 5-digit Explorer 2 in black dial especially, but in polar dial 16570. That's still a very good deal in the secondary market if you want to get a Rolex sports watch. And the case proportions again are more traditional, more conservative than the current lineup, which has the advertised diameter of 42. Now, I have, of course, my fellow panelist, my co host, so to speak, um, Aussie expat, who likes them both, who likes both the current reference of Explorer 2 in white dial, which is something that he just acquired, and who also loves the 5-digit reference, which is also would have been also a great fit to his collection. But yes, if you're not looking for a shiny new object, if you're not necessarily looking for what is latest and greatest, 16570 is is a great option. And for me, it means a lot that it was used as a real tool watch, not to in a not too distant past. For me, it means a lot that it's something that Archie Luxury obsessed about and engraved, etched on my mind. And specifically, it also matters that this was one of the best deals, relatively speaking, that I got in my years of collecting watches, and that gave me a certain kind of satisfaction. Again, I don't look into these things as financial investments, uh, but it feels good to have purchased one at the time I did, and it feels even better now with how they keep trending today. It's fascinating, really, that the birds of a feather flock together, and the worst scum seem to somehow f- become the Optimus Prime, kind of like the Rat King in New York, right? You find someone who is racist, homophobic, and someone who advocates uh, for other people to commit suicide. You find all of these beautiful character traits in the trolls that support a very specific channel, which is basically the mother of all evils. And the rant's gonna be due very soon. The comeback is going to be very sweet. The dish is getting cold on the counter. Polars at 3,500. That was the Rolex collector currency at the time when the Polar Explorer 2 was trending around 3,500. That was the watch you would always keep at hand, if only to exchange it with others, trade with others. And yes, at that time, the Polar was not the obvious choice, right? We have talked a little bit about this, that nowadays, when someone wants to buy an Explorer 2, whether we are talking about the current reference or the 5-digit, they almost uh, instinctively go towards the Polar. At that time, in 2010s, and not until, yeah, Until recently, Polar was, in fact, the less desired, if not undesirable, Rolex sports watch. It was the contrarian's choice, not anymore. Alan Gildo says, I paid 5,200 USD for mine in 2018, my first Rolex. Yeah, I paid 4,500 for mine in 2017, box and papers. It was crazy. Alan Gilda says, I fell in love with the white dial. It's my only white dialed watch. And again, white dial I can understand in a dress watch. Before I encountered Explorer 2 with the polar dial, I never I never imagined that I would own a white dial sports watch. And somehow this clicked. And it had a lot to do again with the role of Archie Luxury and Archie Verse, to which I'm always grateful, to whom I'm always grateful. But also with this idea that that white was not so randomly chosen, right? It was actually the polar color, and to tie it all together, it was actually the color of some of the oyster perpetuals that accompanied the 1953 British expedition to Mount Everest. So the white dial on an Explorer just makes sense. It just makes sense. Thomas Broadbent says, try the new Explorer 2 today. Great fit. Right? Of course, Thomas is talking about um, this bad boy right here. Let's check it out. Great fit. They gave me the new catalog, listed the Destro in it. This is the GMT Master 2 with the green and black bezel, meant to be worn or designed to be worn on the right hand, let's say very quickly. Not necessarily, though. And Tudor FXD. The AD is getting real Rolex new stock at the 2019 flow, just much bigger demand. User Unknown says for the Explorer, has everything you need. It's a great watch. I recall Archie obsessing over Explorer 1016s and 14270s. Yes, actually, as you might remember from those days, 1016 was Archie's first Rolex. That was what he got from a dealer or from a friend, rather, I think, who had a watch shop, who had a jeweler, and he actually had it on some sort of payment plan, I think. um, he paid it off over time. Archie also obsessed over the Seiko Alpinist. Yes, in a negative way, let's just say. J with D. Hey, man. My love to New York City. I'll be visiting soon. Um, I look forward to that trip. Big Meat says, legend has it, when you get the Polar Explorer 2, you start clapping like a seal growing a pair of horns. It the legend may just be true. I can neither confirm nor deny it. Thomas says, which watch do you think you will wear on your mission of justice? Ah, I don't know. It has to be a watch with the Archie Luxury connection. It has to be a watch that will decide on the true heir to the mantle. It has to be a watch that is worthy of pontifical designation and sponsorship. Zeke says they should make this, and he's talking about 22657O, right? The new Polar Explorer 2, 41. I guess like the sub or 40. Yeah, I mean, look, for some, it still wears really well. And I can't really argue with that. Thomas says, clarification, I'm on the list to get the Destro. Confident I'll get the call. Best of luck, Thomas. Best of luck. You never know. You know, it's an interesting time. Again, like you said, I think the supply is catching up finally with the flow that it had before the pandemic. But after the pandemic, post pandemic, I think the demand has increased disproportionate to the supply to begin with. Um, so I'm not sure it's something that they can catch up to, but perhaps, and the word is precisely that. Perhaps they are the dealers, the authorized dealers, are changing their methods, their practices a little bit. I'm not too sure on that, but that's the word out there. Um, why can't I find the new GMT Master 2 as instantly as I used to on the website? Did they already put it somewhere else? Hmm. Ah, that's it. Yeah, this is the model that Thomas Broadbent is talking about. Alan Gilda comes out with his best impression of Archie Luxury. Get alone, get alone, get alone. Messaging matters is this may be polarizing. Nice pun, but Prince Harry was spotted wearing a Polar Explorer 2 during his military service. I don't see why it should be polarizing. Messaging matters. Generally, I don't mix in my personal opinions or political opinions when I'm talking about a watch or when I'm talking about the watch that a celebrity is wearing. Um, I do remember this story, and I have seen some photos, although not really detailed photos of Harry wearing an Explorer 2. Uh, I do think it's the 42 millimeter case. Um, the, so I'm not sure off the top of my mind. So let's check out some of the sites where we do see it. Yo, hmm. Actually, it does kind of look like the. Jesus, I can't tell. Can you guys tell which Explorer 2 it is? Does anyone have a picture where it's a little more clear? It is the 6 digit, yeah, 42 millimeter. Prince Harry is cool. Uh, I meant that Prince Harry seems to be polarizing nowadays, not his watch. And Jay with D says AC3 will only bless Rolex. Oh, that makes sense. That makes some sense. Maybe I should think about that. Alan Gilder says, I don't know, Thomas. You're going to have to get them some Melba toast or something. It's a different world. Aussie knows how to work it. I apologize, guys. Excuse me. Thomas Broadband says they lose. Polarizing with a polar dial. That could be a Rolex advertisement. It could be, possibly. Could be. But yeah, the Explorer 2 is a cool watch, I think, in any shape. Oh yes. So this is an obvious one, for example. Now that's a nice close-up that allows us to see that it has an orange hand and that it is therefore the 6-digit reference, which was the one available at the time. But yeah, speaking of polarizing watches, this new GMT Master 2 certainly was one when it came out, and I was at once taken aback, but not entirely surprised by the fact that the copy that accompanied it, whether it was in more public announcements or in this authorized dealer newsletter that was somehow leaked to me, there was not a mention of left-handers at all, right? And I could guess as much, because you are talking technically about 10% of the population here, and Rolex would never deprive themselves from having the broadest possible appeal. But nevertheless, for something that's as quirky as that, and that's as unpredictable as it gets in terms of new releases from Rolex, one would expect that they would lean on the fact that they have both the crown and uniquely this time the date window and the cyclops on the reverse side rather than the other way around, because Rolex has made so-called destro watches before. Destro meaning right in Italian, which means that you can wear it on your right hand and it will line up in the same way that uh, your regular production watch will wear on your left. But in that case, they had left simply the date opening and the cyclops, of course, in the same place. So when you look at, for example, some of the auction results from before, you can see how there were a few examples of left-hand drive or destro Rolexes, and specifically, for example, this GMT, right? The 4-digit reference. I'm guessing 6542 due to the bakelite bezel. You see, of course, the crown is on the opposite side, but not so the date opening and the magnifier that accompanies it. John Cena also wears a Polar Explorer 2. Big Meech says, first, you get a man on the moon. That's right, guys. Then you get a Rolex Explorer 2 Polar two-piece combo meal deal. Mm, that might be the way to go for you too, Meech. You have gotten your Speedmaster quite recently, and maybe that watch that has been giving you wet dreams, the 5-digit Explorer 2, may be yours quite soon. I hope so. Two-piece Hungerbuster combo meal deal. Messaging Matters says, Meech, after last night, I guess we shouldn't mention Scheider to you. Yes. Big Meech, I'm hoping that you are taking those stool softeners and other homemade aids to help with your particular ailment. Hungerbuster, tell me, you nasty fikers. Tell me what you nasty fikers think of that. Yes, drop a nasty and vicious comment below. Guys, by the way, we are almost halfway through tonight's show. I think I might actually go longer and make it to midnight here in Los Angeles, which means we have maybe quite a bit to go. But we're almost at 1.5 hours. So this is a moment for me to thank you for your presence. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your interventions. If you have been enjoying the show, please hit the like button. Subscribe if you haven't. Spread the word. Share the link on other platforms. That would help me a great deal. If you could tell your friends about the channel, help me expand this community, because my first major goal is to reach 1,000 subscribers, is to get monetized. And until then, of course, you can always support the channel. You can always encourage the work I do here with a PayPal contribution. That will be at lordhellespontv@gmail.com. That's lordhellespontv@gmail.com. And I also have a Cash App, $LHVVV, $LHVVV. And the information is there in the crawling ticker and is available in the video description as well. Thank you so much for considering it. Thomas says, I truly enjoy the salespeople at the watch stores, brands, or any of the dealers. They're good folks. I have fun. So do they. Authentic, honest, no games, decency. We all get something positive. Yes, look, I mean, Thomas, we do hear the horror stories, but consider how much negativity rules on the internet, right? From Yelp reviews to here on YouTube, you usually hear the loudest, most obnoxious, and at times truly demented people. They're the ones who scream the loudest. The positive experiences, I don't think get emphasized enough. I don't think they get shared enough. So I appreciate that you're doing that. And I think sometimes, honestly, I'm sorry to not give some people the benefit of doubt, but I'm guessing sometimes, people enter these spaces, people enter authorized dealers and other watch stores with a sense of entitlement just because they have money to buy the watch, and get truly agitated and perhaps even visibly angry. In which case, I don't know if you have ever been in sales, but it's really, really difficult to deal with that kind of customer, right? If they have decided in their mind that they're not happy with what's going on, it takes a truly talented salesperson to turn things around. And not everyone is blessed with that talent. Not everyone is given by their employer, by the corporates, that kind of training. So usually in these situations, my sympathy is, for better or worse, with sales associates. I do give them the benefit of doubt, but at times, um, they also deserve some of the ire, because I've also met the worst as well in certain ADs and in certain brand boutiques, and Rolex was part of that. Audemars Piguet certainly is almost without exception the worst in terms of customer service, and no uh, good behavior or personal nicety on your part is going to change that either. So it's a give and take, and treating your fellow human being the way you would like to be treated would be a good start. And Alan says, nice, Thomas. And Big Meat says, currently sitting on a donut as I'm watching. I'm glad you find new ways to prop yourself up, Meech, so you can actually see the screen. That's a nice upgrade from a pile of books to a donut. We'll see you really tall if you join the show later, I'm sure. Watch Nicholas is here. Hey, hello, my friend. Thank you for your time. Thank you for coming. Thank you for at least dropping by and reminding people to upvote. It really helps, guys. Every single like helps me gain that much more exposure. So it matters a lot for me. And Jimmy says upvoted. Thank you so much. All that 3 thumbs up. Hey, upvote with your main and troll accounts, guys. It all helps. It all counts. And Alan says Meech is screaming the loudest tonight on his donuts. And he's not talking about Krispy Kreme, Alan. Thomas Broadbent says emotional judo is a great sport and wonderfully satisfying. Communication, conversation sometimes is a deficient skill in some. Old school talking is wonderful. Yeah, again, we take it for granted that we can communicate since we are speaking the same language, but it's never that simple. It's never that simple. So do any of you have any similar watch stories? Do you care about the heritage behind the brand when you are choosing a watch, when you are deciding what watch to wear? Do you care about the stories and histories that uh, brought that particular watch, that model, that genre to our day? Do you, or does it not really matter? Right? It's really about how you personally connect to the watch, how your story ties into the story of that watch, or simply just because you like and enjoy the craftsmanship that goes into that particular watch, or simply because you like the aesthetics of that particular design. Let's hear some of these stories. Big Meat says, I've got a shipment of books of luxury to last. I'll be able to sit on it, pause, and it will double over as TP when I need it. Hmm. That stuff was in short supply, wasn't it, at the beginning of the pandemic? To the point that the United States almost discovered bidet as a wonderful technology. Guys, by the way, this is my Instagram, Old New England, old dot new dot England. Um, it's by and large, it's focused on style and lifestyle as it intersects with wristwatches. A lot of overlapping, but also different kinds of content as well on that page. So if you have not followed me yet, feel free to do so. and I post on it daily, if not more, and it's 90% of the time it's watch related. So I'm sure you'll find something to enjoy there, if you find something to enjoy and learn from here. Alan Gildo says, I think there are levels. My Smith's Commando PRS 47 is a resurrected brand. It's a Phoenix brand, as they call it. Yeah. I mean, it's a handsome watch. And after having talked about Explorer, um, for so long, I can't I can't necessarily or automatically habitually say anything bad about this particular watch, except of course it looks like a homage. Um, but I would love to hear more about your story with this particular brand, Alan. There are people who constantly question the interrupted pedigree of the watch. To me, it's a well made 36 millimeter kicker. Yeah, that's an interesting issue, right? We have a lot of brands now, some of whom have reclaimed their place, um, in the world of watches. Others still rising up that belong to the category of Phoenix brands, right? A. Lange und Söhne, for example, is a Phoenix brand. It was a very well respected watchmaker in the town of Glashütte, uh, in Germany, before the war. After the war, basically Walter Lange, who was leading his workshop at the time, had to leave the country, had to leave the Soviet controlled zone, and build himself a new life in federal Germany. And the company was only resurrected in the 90s as A. Lange und Söhne, um, in the leadership, with the leadership of Günther Blümlein and Walter Lange. And Blümlein at that time, of course, was the executive for um, Les Manufactures Horlogères, which was, I think, at that time under the company Mannesmann as a watch making conglomerate. It had in its body IWC Schaffhausen, it had Jaeger-LeCoultre, and Blümlein's masterstroke, perhaps, was in propping up this German giant of watchmaking in Saxony as a high horology house, and they succeeded, right? Starting with 1994, and their four initial models, which included the now iconic Lange One, they succeeded. You can say Blancpain was one of those brands. It's again, I think it's the oldest on record, if I'm not mistaken. It's the oldest watchmaker. It's the oldest watchmaking company on paper, um, but it had quite a patchy and interrupted existence, right? Having been founded in 1735, I want to say, and then it it risked going under a few times, and it was the now legendary Jean-Claude Biver that put it on the map again. And nowadays, people don't necessarily think of it as quote unquote an interrupted or Phoenix brand, right? People can take all sorts of issues with Blancpain, talk about how they're owned by the Swatch Group, but usually the harshest criticism doesn't come in the form of, oh, that's just a Phoenix brand. Um, Chapek has been facing a lot of criticism, right? Having basically crowdsourced the funding, the establishment of their brand, and taken up or taken on the name of one of the founders of Patek Philippe, right? It was Patek Chapek company before Chapek broke up with Patek and went his own way for a little while there. So, but Chapek started making its mark quite recently as well. And God knows, maybe in 10 years, people won't talk much about how they were founded and what name they carry, and focus simply on the kind of work they do, which is what Alan does at the end of the day. He says, hey, I care a little bit about the fact that Smiths had supplied some of the watches that were on the Everest expedition in 1953. But what I really care about is the fact that they make a affordable, well-made 36 millimeter kicker. Great. JWD says heritage is very valued in choosing hunted for just the right Breguet to honor the pocket watches by Abraham Louis Breguet in the early 19th century. Yes, Breguet is a band that I also hold quite near and dear to my heart, and not only for their heritage and tradition of innovation. I think any one of the Abraham Louis Breguet achievements could have become a story, a foundational story for an iconic brand. But he has many, right? He has the invention of tourbillon, of course. He has the Breguet overcoil. He has basically the aesthetic heritage of those Breguet hands that are now used by many other high horological brands, including, for example, Patek Philippe. Of course, that particular style and font of Arabic numerals on a watch dial are often called Breguet numerals. Of course, the Breguet overcoil. What else? I mean, the fact that he had an entire contract with the French royal military already in his lifetime, like all these things that would have been foundational and mythical for any other luxury brand, any other watchmaker. Breguet has like a whole pile, like half a dozen different stories that can frame that brand. And we have not even arrived in the 20th century. His great grandson and his parts in the history of aviation and making of airplanes. We have not arrived in that 1950s moment where Breguet was one of the biggest and to this day the most widely recognized suppliers of the Type 20 contract by the French Aéronaval, the aerial forces of the French Navy. So there's so much that one can honor in that history, and I'm talking, of course, both about the brand, but also about the person who acquires the watch. Thomas Broadbent says, yes, the purity of the explorer, understated, the Everest heritage tied to my personal relationships in the Himalayas, friends, Sherpas, environmental work in Nepal. I actually chase after it. This is Thomas's story with the explorer. Operating there for 5 years as a memory keepsake, right? He has been in Nepal for 5 years. Great. I don't think he still is, but at least he spent those 5 years, half a decade in Nepal, honoring the country and the people I loved after using 3 different watches that had varied performance while in the country. The Explorer 39 is the best. Now it's coming out, Thomas. Now we know why you have been defending the Explorer 39 so vigorously. But listen, this is one of the great things about Rolex actually discontinuing things or doing things a different way for a different era. Right? While I was establishing the foundations of my vintage Rolex collection, um, I was of two minds about how Rolex was doing things in the 21st century. The ceramic bezel inserts, the bloated case sizes, just the general shininess of the watches. That to me was very off-putting at first, and with time, I not only came to terms with it, but I actually became happy with it because they are doing something different. They will never double dip in their own history and heritage and one sully it forever, right? They're not doing that. They're not doing messed up versions of what is considered best and iconic in their history. They're doing something different. Um, and also, they will never go back and reissue things as they were either, which makes what they did in the past much more unique and much more limited and in a way much more exclusive, right? That's another um archie luxury principle. I did tell you, I feel like I'm archie luxury in 2012, and that's another principle, right? You want the watch that's some other person can't simply walk into the boutique to get. You want the discontinued watch because it's something different, because it's something limited, because it will take you off the beaten path, because it will make you research, look for information, seek knowledge, learn, study, and ultimately start enjoying that search, start taking pleasure in that research, and enjoy both the journey and ultimately the fruits of your labor, right? What you acquire at the end of that search, at the end of that journey. So actually, it should be a privilege to own uh, an Explorer in 39 millimeter, because they're not going back to that, because they're not coming back anytime soon. And you have something that's not in the current lineup. And within the historical timeline, that has not devalued those watches, that has in fact made them in a way much more desirable because they are rare. So you're winning on multiple fronts here, even though the current offering doesn't necessarily hit the right notes for you, doesn't necessarily work for you, doesn't necessarily inspire you in the same way. You'll always have your watch. Jay with D says, I like, pardon me, I like the 39 millimeter for its scale as a modern sports watch. It just fits great in many wrist sizes. That's a good one. Thomas Broadbent says again, Breguet, are they not the first to develop the cabinet resonance tourbillon for ship navigation? Yes, they had a contract with the French Royal Navy in the 19th century for developing marine chronometers. And they still, as you know, somehow honored that heritage with their marine or marine um, line of watches, and almost always that line has included one that has the alarm function, that has always had the réveil. So it's certainly in the back of their minds. And let's open that page, because people talk a lot, of course, and right. And these are all such important foundational stories, and such fecund realms for these watch brands. Of course, the marketing departments are on it. Of course, uh, the media is on it when talking about the historic achievements of Breguet in the fields of watchmaking, and later on aviation. But this marine heritage is not always emphasized, and that's what they say right here, right? Marine watches are based on the traditional Breguet values while interpreting them in a contemporary way in order to create sporty timepieces. The marine watches possess all the qualities laid down by Abraham Louis Breguet as a chronometer maker to the French Navy, right? And they had this piece a little while ago, 5887 BR, which was the Marine Tourbillon Equation Marchande. It's the grand complication wristwatch with running equation of time. Self-winding movement, perpetual calendar, tourbillon, balance spring in silicon, day. Oh, thanks for letting me know, Bezos. I think my mic got disconnected. Can you hear me now? Is it any better? Tell me if you can hear me now. Fats, hey man, he says, I salute your indefatigability. That's Meech lost. He will be Googling what that means. um, no problem. Okay, now you can hear me. They may have done it at the beginning of their history in the 17th. Sentry, I am back. Thank you. Yeah, hey, I'm gonna tell it in a way that doesn't need any looking up in the dictionary, and that as a boxing mind you'll probably appreciate as well, Fats. I have a dog in me, so that's not going to relent easily, and the fight in that dog is disproportionate to its size for sure. And Thomas says maybe we need to recalibrate the scope of Breguet, a tool watch with high style but executing function at the highest level, telling time perfectly. Yes, with some depreciation, but with class heritage. Hey, um, that's a euphemistic way of putting it, and I'm saying this as a big fan of the brand. By the way, Thomas, I think to say that Breguet has some depreciation is being really kind. I think if you buy these things new, they depreciate enormously. I mean, it's like a lot of these pieces are already like 30% off or more in unworn new condition in the secondary market, and sometimes up to 50% off from sticker price in the secondary market. I found the model that I was talking about in the current Marine lineup. It's called Alarme Musicale 5447. Let me just pull it up from some other web page because, hey, how telling is this, right? As always, Breguet is tripping on its own feet, sabotaging themselves with the unworking and unworkable website. All right. Okay. I finally got there. It says Marine Alarme Musicale wristwatch, self winding movement with dates, alarm time, and alarm power reserve indicators. And that's, by the way, you can wind both the alarm and the watch with the same crown. So that's uh, that's a plus. Balance spring in silicone, of course. It's actually a dual time watch, so it shows a second time zone. Alarm on and off indicators. Of course, the silicone balance spring is there as it is all across the board, if I'm not mistaken, in Breguet wristwatches. Sapphire caseback, screw locked crown, water resistant to 5 bar with all those pushers, of course. That's as much as they can achieve. 40 millimeter in diameter. Um, and it's it's available either in titanium or in white gold or pink gold. And it's actually a very cool model. Um, it's the alarm itself feels nice on the wrist. I have to say, it's not the kind of experience you get from a minute repeater, but still, it's some other tactile dimension that you don't always experience with most other wristwatches. Jake Brooks says loud and clear. Thank you. Thank you, JB. Thanks to you. Fat says, well put. And Jay with D says, these Breguets are so interesting to spend time with. I like their magnificent designs. I've always liked the Breguet watch. I think most of their line, even the sportier stuff, has some of their stylistic cues that hey, if you're a horological geek, if you're a whiz, so to speak, watch Idiot Savant, um, you'll be you'll be reeled in no time, because most of their watches look like wristwatches, sorry, pocket watches converted to a wristwatch. They also have very specific elements, starting with the lugs, but that's notion that the cases are usually fluted all around with that coin edge design. I think they should have actually a page. Yes, unmistakable signs. That's what they call it. Of course, the hands, the Arabic numerals, but also the engine turning or guilloche work on the dial. I mean, everything. Um, or the fact that every dial is numbered separately from the model number. Of course, people sometimes confuse this. Every dial is numbered with the number of the caliber that powers the watch. So you would see this number 2775, for example, on the dial of the watch, but also engraved on the caliber, on the movement that powers that watch, right? The lugs that look like, again, a makeshift way of converting a pocket watch to a wristwatch. Um, this particular font of Arabic numerals that have become so iconic and so aligned with the brand that they're simply called Breguet numerals. The hands that you can get a peek of here that are simply called Breguet hands, even when they're found on another watch. And the case band fluting that I was just talking about, that's coin edge finish that you can see even the most rugged and tool-like of Breguet watches, which is the Type 20 series, of course. And of course, the hand-guided guilloche work, the engine turns decorations on the dials, which are magnificent and still in many ways the industry standard. Jeffrey Blue, welcome back. By the way, the Marine Alarme Musicale, Thomas is calling a wristwatch music box. That's a nice term. Jeffrey Blue says, I own a Breguet Classique 5277 in pink gold. I think this reference represents Breguet in its purest form. Let's check it out. Breguet 5227 in rose gold. Ooh. Wow. Wow. What a dream. What a dream. In many ways, it does, right? Because you have that iconic look of the Breguet case with the stylized lugs, with the fluting around the case that is especially prominent on the case flanks. You have the sportier version of the Breguet hands. You also have the chronograph configuration that reminds you, if you know what to look for, of the big eye, right? That's totalizer that was originally designed for 15 minutes, but is converted to a 30-minute totalizer due to the movement, due to the automatic movement that powers the watch. And of course, that beautiful hand guilloche work that is executed in this wonderful inspiration, wonderful nautical inspiration of a wave dial that seems, in a way, both very finely drawn, but also rather arbitrary and random, um, as if it were genuinely lapping waves on a shore. It's a beautiful, beautiful piece. Oops. Sorry, it's my fault. It's my fault. I was just harping on this. You were looking at the classique. Hey, I do this sometimes, guys. I apologize. I can get carried away. Um, Beautiful piece. Again, you can see the family resemblance, even though at first these two watches seem to be worlds apart, right? The Marine being a sporty chronograph, this 5277 being one of the most conservative executions of an elegant dress watch, yet the case shape is unmistakable. The Breguet hands are there. Look at all that um, guilloche work that has been done on the dial, from the chapter ring of the minutes track to that kind of pyramid design at the center of the dial. You have the conservatism of those Breguet hands against the Roman numerals and seconds on the subdial, but also a little bit of flair with that um, power reserve indicator that at once interrupts those classical design cues, but also adds a little bit more of a flavor into the whole piece. Jeffrey Blue, thank you for understanding. I just um, oh, what am I doing exactly? Jesus. All right, roll the tape, guys. One more try. Now I'm back. Oh man. All right, once more. Guys, you can see the family resemblance, right? The iconic case shape is unmistakable, whether we are talking about the Marine chronograph or the Classique dress watch. Of course, you see the guilloche work is second to none at the chapter ring, that minutes track, and then the barley corn pyramid-like design that decorates the center dial. You have the classic elegance of the Breguet hands against Roman numerals, seconds on the subdial, as a dress watch should be. But you have a little bit of flight of fancy, a little bit of modern flair with the power reserve indicator there at right between 1 and 2 o'clock. That seems to interrupt the classicism of the design, but ends up adding a different kind of flavor to it. Ultimately, it's a beautiful piece, Jeffrey. Again, thank you for understanding. Um, I I kind of lost it for a little bit there, so thank you for staying with me. and wear it in the best of health, Jeffrey. There it is. Yeah, it's a gorgeous, gorgeous piece. And Jeffrey Blue says that's pure Breguet, exactly like a miniaturized pocket watch. And J with D says extra thin case, I presume. Thomas says, can we juxtapose this with the Zaxonia? Yes, let's pull up the Zaxonia. And Jeffrey Blue says, no problem. Thank you for understanding. Um, this is what I will do. Save image as, and then we will pull up the A. Lange und Söhne Saxonia. And the case, by the way, is 8 millimeters thin when it comes to the Breguet 5277 BR. Yes, 38 millimeters, 8 millimeters thick. The guilloche dial just mesmerizes. I agree. And look at the movement as well. And you see, he bought it new from the AD at 25% off, and that's a good deal, and that's what one should try to negotiate. Let's see what we can do in terms of um, sharing the screen. No, that's not what we can do. Let me see. Yeah, we can do this. Sorry, guys. Save. Let's see. I think I will manage. And let's see. Yeah, there we go. We have now the two of these watches side by side. Erlanger und Söhne, Saxonia, and the Breguet 50 to 77. And in a way, Erlanger und Söhne having its own particular design codes and having its own severity errs on the more classical side of things, right? There's not much of interruption in the dial, except for doubled up indices at the quarters. But the case design, of course, is more reminiscent, again, of the classical cues of the Breguet, but also stylized and modernized a little bit. Jay with D says, that's a really nice watch. I'm aiming for 7337 one day. And Jeffrey Blue says, another beauty, Jay with D. Is that a Breguet movement covered similarly to a Laurent Ferrier? I think it would be the other way around. And JWD says, Jeffrey Blue, I find the traditional design language of Breguet to be my fav. Let's check out 7337. That's a beauty as well. Guys, with that, let me take a tiny break. I will be right back. Hi guys, I'm back. Thanks for being patient. Jeffrey Blue, take care, man. It's nice to see you. It's nice to have you here. Thanks for dropping by and sharing with us your passion for Breguet and specifically their dress watches. That 5277 in rose gold was quite the piece. JWC says about 7337, the palindrome. I would love to get this in rose gold with the silver dial. So let's check that out while we're at it. Why not? This is it. This is it. Wow. All those levels and patterns of guilloche work on the dial are, I guess, in and of itself enough, right? You have, of course, here a classical timepiece, seconds on the subdial, but you have also so much more. You have the day date and the moon phase as well. And the dial is just to die for. Very impressive. Good night, Alan. Take care. Was that a whiskey a go-go music? I don't know. It's the StreamYard rock. So it's the free music I get with StreamYard. And the detail on the moon phase, yeah, that's a beautiful moon phase as well. And the way they just decorated that opening in and of itself and framed it, I think that's worth of some praise in and of itself as well. It's really great. Fantastic. And these retail for 43,000. Yep. Thomas was right to bring up Lange because that seems to be the direct competition in terms of market placement, at least, right? Richemont has A. Lange und Söhne in Glashütte, Saxony, and Swatch Group has Breguet. The two giants. The artistic check, like Palace tile. Yeah, in the second subdial, right, Thomas? It's a very, very cool touch for sure. And of course you have that caliber number 1808 there. And Jay with D says, this is the second reincarnation. This is the exact reincarnation of a pocket watch from 1800s. Amazing. Amazing. And Jake Brooks says, gorgeous texture indeed. And 29 and a half. That's the moon phase. Beautiful. So what other watch brands are we so excited about? What other brands, models, designs, genres, kinds of wristwatches excite us so much? We have talked quite a bit about Rolex, particularly uh, about the lineage of that lineup of explorers that are tightly connected to the history of exploration, especially connected with the attempts and finally successful attempts of ascending the summit of Mount Everest. And we have talked quite a bit about Breguet in terms of their history of innovation, their tradition of innovation, and how they bring both the aesthetic approaches and also technological inventions of their own heritage into the present day. We talked, of course, Alan's passion for Smiths and the affordable and reliable 36 millimeter timepiece they produce in their Commando PRS 047. The Saxonia line is Thomas's favorite, apparently, for A. Lange und Söhne. Can you tell us a little more, Thomas, about why you like Lange und Söhne's watches in general, and especially the Saxonia line? Because it's not a common piece choice. It's not a commonplace choice, right? People usually go for habitually go for Lange 1, right? Lange 1 is their more commonsensical, more iconic lineup. Tell us more about why you prefer the Saxonia and why they appeal to you a little more. Honestly, I'm a huge fan of Saxonia Thin myself. Um, they are reliably and simply beautiful. It's the flattest, thinnest watch they produce. Pink gold, argente, the silver dial. And they also have a boutique exclusive edition of it with the special dial, a dark blue gold flux, as they call it. That's the beautiful view of the movement. And that's one of the things that I really enjoy about Lange in general, but the Saxonia in particular, right? Because when you also um, sideline the boutique exclusive, the special edition, and whatever else, and go for something like this, right? What you have is very simple on the face of it, beautiful, classical, two-hander, just as a dress watch should be. But when you turn it around, you have the view of an incredible complexity and very exclusive beauty. From the swan neck regulator to that yellowish hue of the bridge plate, three-quarter plates, made from German silver, the fact that um, every um, every single piece of the movement is hand finished in some way. The rubies, the heat blued screws, and of course the rubies sit in gold chaton. It's just there's every piece of it, every piece of the movement that's so complex yet so simple has something to admire, something to look at and contemplate. Beautiful pieces. I'll go to that Saxonia uh, oversized date. Pure simplicity is his vote for Saxonia. They were the precursor, now the popular. Saxonia is the art of discretion, J with D says. Saxonia outsized date. Let's go for that. The art of discretion, simplicity without looking underdeveloped. Thomas agrees with J with D. That dark blue dial with gold stars is insane. That was the boutique exclusive version of Saxonia Ultra Thin. And now we are with Saxonia oversized dates. And J with D says about Saxonia Ultra Thin and its movements for a time only dress watch. This is amazing. And this is um, the addition, of course, of seconds on the subdial, oversized date, and of course, that pusher at 10 o'clock that's wonderfully satisfying to operate and that helps you cycle through the dates quickly. I love this watch as well. And it has, again, as simply and classically beautiful it is, it also has a certain um, you know, more modernistic perspective that they accentuated in a way with that padded and lighter colored crocodile strap. And of course, there's an automatic movement here that you can marvel at with a platinum weight. And you can see that glacé ebbing, the perlage decoration, the freehand engraved um, swan neck regulator. It's really a nice piece. And how much did these cost? I wanna check it out. I have a Lange price list somewhere here. Hmm. This might be this might need some updating. I think they just had a price increase and it's not the same increase across the board, so I can't tell with absolute certainty. But this watch basically retails around $30,000. Yeah, 29,300 is what mine says, but I think it increased since then. And the entry level Saxonia, um, which we skipped over, is 19,700. The ultra thin, which we took a closer look at, or rather, they just call it thin, that's 21,200, except for the boutique exclusive, of course. And I don't know if that's something I can. Oh yeah, that was listed at one point in time, 26,100. I'm assuming probably 27 and a half or so now, if it's still available. Eddie, hey, thank you for your support. He reminds everyone to upvote and subscribe if you haven't. Thank you so much, Eddie. Please hit that like button. It really, really helps, and it matters a great deal to me. So I'll be really grateful. And spread the word if you can. Jay with D says that oversized date window with separate numerals is a great balance with the small seconds subdial. Yes. That's why it's important to hear these sorts of observations because um, even in seemingly crowded and obviously asymmetric dials that Erlanger and Söhne sometimes have, there is a certain sense of balance. There is a method to their madness. There is an order within all that chaos. And in this case, again, there's of course that quirky pusher for the oversized date, but in either case, the dial in and of itself has a certain sense of balance in the way that the double opening for the oversized date somehow balances out the second subdial. And that is, by the way, my favorite combination, I think, in this series. The pink gold with the argenté dial. That is the one. Confidently say pink gold strap swan neck, pre-owned 20K. And Thomas, this is superb. Jay with D says, Lord, this is right in the range to challenge Vacheron Constantin patrimony traditionnel models or the Patek Calatrava. Yeah, I think, and look, I mean, I'm a little biased. I like, I like certain things about Vacheron Constantin, but I was never out and out a fan of the brand. Again, I respect a lot of Patek's heritage, and there's an odd model here and there that I really like. But again, I'm not a devotee of the brand. But in a way, I'm a A. Lange und Söhne fanboy. So you know where I stand on this. I think Lange's dress watches, and whether you're looking for Lange 1 or Saxonia Thin or Saxonia Automatic with the oversized dates, my vote would always go for Lange for a dress watch um, from Haute Horlogerie brand. So, and Thomas agrees with me. He says Saxonia or Calatrava, I go with the path less taken, with the path not taken, road less known. Jay with D says Saxonia over Patek in this battle. Hey, we seem to be coalescing around this. We seem to be agreeing with each other, guys. We are moving along in our show, which I have the pleasure to host with you. It's 2.5 hours now. I think I will go for a little while longer, But in the meantime, please upvote if you haven't, subscribe if you are not a subscriber already. I have watch-related content coming to you, at least in the form of these live streams every night at 7:30 Pacific Daylight Savings Time, 10:30 East Coast. I also have other watch-related content. Usually, in a way, watches intersect with man style and lifestyle every other day. So check out all that content, see if you like it, and let me know what you think in the comments. In either case, I appreciate your support, but if you could spread the word, if you could send the link out in other platforms, I would very much appreciate it. Also, before I reach 1,000 subscribers, before I get monetized, if you want to support this channel, if you want to encourage the work I do here, if you want to help me in creating new, original, and exclusive content, you can always consider a PayPal donation at lordhellespontv@gmail.com, lordhellespontv@gmail.com. I also have a Cash App, $LHVVV, $LHVVV. German watchmakers, thank you. Thomas says, good night to you as well. Jay with D says, the hour-minute hands of this Saxonia is what catches my eye versus the Calatrava hands. ALS is my preference. I do love the Erlanger und Söhne Alpha hands. I think it's a very distinctive design, and it's kind of like the Breguet case shape, right? You see it from a mile away, and you'll recognize it. Of course, that's a little bit of an embellishment. You have to have the eyes of an eagle, especially to see these hands from afar. But you know what I mean, right? If you were to blank out the name of the brand, you would recognize it thanks to the hands, even if it weren't for the oversized date. And same thing with Breguet. You could blank out the entire dial if you wish. You see that case, you know it's a Breguet. And let's check out User Unknown is asking for thoughts on the Cartier Tank Solar Beats. My friend, wristwatchholic, Alex, showed me this watch earlier today. It's and he was telling me that the band is vegan, that the strap is vegan. And I told him I'm not preparing to eat it, but it's good to know. I like it. I think this comes in a few different configurations, right? Sorry, I went directly to basically a secondary dealer, a gray market dealer. I don't know where this went now. Tank Solar. So we're looking at this, right? The large model with the solar beat quartz movement. Honestly, in discrete, small wristwatches, particularly in this sort of iconic shape, such as the tank, I really have not much problem with a quartz movement because, you know, in this sort of diminutive case shape and design, it can be outrageously expensive sometimes, and um, extortionately so. So one has to appreciate the fact that this scales right under the $3,000 mark. And for a dress watch, a two-hander quartz movement is just fine. And maybe in certain cases preferable, right? Some people wear dress watches really from one occasion to another, and just for a few times during the year. So in those cases, they might just prefer to pick it up, strap it on their wrist, and go. Not they don't have to deal with the date. They don't have to deal with setting the time and winding the watch. All these things that I actually love doing, all these things that to me increases the enjoyment of your watch. That's why I love my reverso and winding it by hand. But I can't argue all the arguments people might have for this. User unknown says seems like a great triage into the world of watches. Quartz, solar, won't need servicing for 10 plus years. Stylish and classic timeless design, priced below 5K new is good. Yeah, a lot of it strikes, it checks a lot of boxes. And again, I just made my best defense for a quartz dress watch in all these ways, right? For first of all, it's much more economical for discrete, smaller dress watch in an unusual shape, right? The prices can jump up quite considerably if we were talking about properly shaped and designed mechanical movement in something like this. It's a two-hander anyways, right? No dates, no seconds hand of any sort. And hey, some people wear their dress pieces once, twice, at most a handful of times a year, and in those occasions they might actually prefer to just strap it on and go without having to set the time or the date or wind the watch. Again, all these things that we might like as watch geeks, 90% of the people don't. Thomas says the Saxonia outsized date has the Breathe Easy of the Patek Perpetual. Interesting comments. Jay with D says Solar Beat is a wise pairing of technologies without losing any of the design language of the icon. And we're talking about the Cartier tank. 15 years of battery life is exceptional. And Jay with D says set it and forget it. High autonomy, accurate Swiss quartz movement is great. Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I think for a dress watch like this, it might just be the thing. It might just be the thing. It might just be what the doctor ordered. And Marco, love the strong opinions. Coming in strong. Welcome to the channel. He says, I would rather save and get Cartier tank Louis Blue in rose gold for about 11, 12K. Let's see. Oh, look, I mean, no argument there. Um, I love a pink gold dress watch as much as I love a dress watch in white metal as well, be it steel or white gold, as long as it's properly executed. But this is really cool, and increasingly, I really like how pink gold coordinates with certain shades of blue. That's just incredible. It reminds me of this reverso that I kept seeing when I was looking for mine. Let me see if I can still find it in my notes on Chrono 24, because it was really a cool design that must have been some sort of limited edition at some point, because you don't see them often. But I like that economic and strategic use of the blue on the dial, rather than just making it an all-out blue dial, which could have taken away from uh, how nice and dressy and classical that watch is. I think in this case we're talking about two different genres, really, even though they're both tanks. I think what we are showing here is very different, and not only in terms of the price point to what we looked at um, for the tank Myst solar beat. Yeah, I couldn't find that reverse, unfortunately, so I'm not going to be able to show. But hey, I like these both. Solar beat or just the hand wound rose gold with blue. Both are extremely elegant and fantastic dress watches. Different budgets, different genres, but I love it. Marco says, I just cannot do quartz. And Jay with D says, so not a fan of solar tech? Marco says, I don't think it's bad. I just personally can't get my head around owning a non mechanically operated watch. Otherwise, I think it's very practical for sure. Jay with D says, I think that dial design with the inner square in blue changes the perception of case size to something even smaller. Could be. I would love to wear this watch. Maybe I should spend some time in the Cartier boutique, which I don't usually go to. I will delve into this, guys, for you. I'll see if I can check out some of these and take some videos. Marco says, sorry, I just woke up, so not caught up on what the discussion was. Uh, the larger heading of the discussion, Marco, and I would love to hear from you about this, is whether we care about the heritage behind the brand when we choose a watch, or when we decide on wearing a particular watch. Do we care about the stories and histories that bring these timepieces to our day, whether we are talking about a specific model, a particular genre of the watch? Do we do we care about all these things, or do we relate to watches on a more case by case and personal basis? Right? Is it more important to you that you have a personal connection with the watch, to go with the watch? Maybe it's the watch that once belonged to your father, or it's the watch that your cool uncle wore, um, or finally you don't care about any of these things. It for you it's only about whether a design clicks with your sense of aesthetics, or you value the craftsmanship and artisanry that goes into the making of a particular brand of watch. And that's what you go with. History be damned, and narratives out of the window. User unknown says, I used to think the same way, but now I don't establish arbitrary roadblocks in watch interests. Very nice way of putting it. It's liberating to like watches for different reasons. Very, very good way of putting it, user unknown. Jay with D says, fair enough, Marco. I have been feeling more appreciation for quartz as I get older. Cartier quartz movements are even pleasantly finished. And user unknown says, nice watch for sure. And Marco says, you're definitely not wrong, user unknown. And Marco adds, heritage is extremely important. Part of buying a luxury watch is buying into the romantic idea of buying into a brand, a history, a maison, and the stories that come from wearing such watches. We agree. And hey, Marco, feel free to jump on. You don't have to show your face. You don't have to. You don't have to do anything. But also feel free to stay in the chat and share your story and your point of view from there as well. And yeah, tell us more about one particular brand or one particular kind of watch that is important to you in this way, and why you value that particular story, um, and that particular branch of historical narrative in that particular watch in relation to that watch. And guys, as always, feel free to just type in any watch question you might have. I answer every single question um, in the best way I can. I usually know what I'm talking about, but if I don't, I'm always happy to learn for you, learn with you. And that's what this channel is about. It's about establishing an open platform where we can talk freely about watches, watches first and watches above all, and then uh, learn together, right? Learn from each other, but also join each other in the quest of researching more into the histories of these timepieces, delving more into the technical details of horology, and ultimately also being more conscious and intentional about the ways in which we integrate these watches into our lives, about the ways we adopt these timepieces as elements of our style. I was hoping to see that powder blue slash baby blue version on the website as well, but I guess I will have to go into that gray market website to take a look at that particular configuration, because I thought that was I genuinely thought this was very cute. It's an amazing color. I mean, it makes the watch a little more playful, and you might say, quote unquote, sporty, and perhaps more ready for everyday wear. But certainly, that's a good look on it. And of course, you can always put it back on a more dressy crocodile strap, and take it out for cocktails. Marco talks about Vacheron Constantin, and I'm sure he didn't choose it accidentally because I was talking I was talking some smack to him on Instagram about how the overseas blue dial is overrated. So he chose Vacheron Constantin of all brands, and he says part of why I love Vacheron Constantin is they are the longest continuously operating watchmaker, perfect, and have been at the top of the watch market since. It's about buying into a brand who focuses on the history of watchmaking and first. Um, I think that's really important. And look, I mean, these things don't just come naturally and grow organically. And the public's attention certainly is not drawn to them automatically like that. The brand has to do something about it. The brand has to be more conscious about it, both in terms of their firsthand and most important practice of producing watches in line with that heritage, in line with that traditional vision, but they also have to make the marketing efforts and even the design efforts to reflect that particular heritage. And Vacheron Constantin is, above all, predicated on continuity. And it's not a coincidence. They have an entire line of watches in their lineup called the historique, right? Why is that, right? Why does Vacheron Constantin have a dedicated lineup of watches where they bring out almost one-to-one reissues of models from their archives, right? It's because they want to emphasize that historical continuity between what Vacheron Constantin once was and what it is now, in a way to press upon the point that that is what they have always been and that's what they always will be. It's really beautiful, and thank you for sharing this perspective, Marco, and to me it's very inspiring as well. I do like certain things about Vacheron Constantin, and it doesn't matter whether I think overseas is for me or whether I think that a particular dial is a little bit overrated, and I still think it is, but it's still a brand that I respect very deeply. User unknown says LHV. I recall you mentioning your grail as double red sea dweller. Stop it. Stop. User unknown, just stop mentioning that watch to me, um, because I'm losing sleep over it. Genuinely, I can't. I won't be. I won't be falling asleep tonight. User unknown, because it's really a watch that keeps coming back to me. Whenever I buy something new, whenever I add something else to my collection, I always start dreaming about making a double red sea dweller mine next. I always think of that next purchase as and dream of a double red sea dweller. How would you know which one is the one? For me, um, I have a very specific way of looking at these watches. For me, it always starts with the dial. I think it's not a coincidence that in English we use the anthropomorphic term face for the dial of the watch, right? And for me, that's the most important part when I look, especially at a vintage watch. The condition of the dial. Um, Look, I don't have a problem with tropical dials per se, right? In the sense that um, like in a way, for example, that a black Rolex dial turns into this like mocha brown. I don't mind that. Um, but under the heading of tropical dials, they have tried to sell us all sorts of watches with clear uh, water and humidity damage that um, that have completely put me off. But I would like a dial in good condition, um, something close to this sort of uh, patina on the loom, right? It doesn't have to be perfectly even with the hands as well, as long as I know the seller, right? As long as I can buy the seller, I can buy into the seller. I can trust the person who is selling me the watch. So if they are not changed, I'm fine with some measure of difference between how the dial has aged in terms of its luminous material and how the hands have. Um, Other than that, I want the original bezel insert with the fat fonts. I don't actually mind if you ask me. I don't actually mind if it has the original bracelet, right? If I get the original bracelet, uh, that's period correct. And if it needs some restoration, I would happily send it to Michael Young in Hong Kong and bide my time. But this one, for example, that was initially um, retailed by Asprey of London and just sold by Christie's for around uh, $57,500 before the premium, of course. Uh, this had a this had a 93 150. So the most modern bracelet that you can put on a four-digit Sea Dweller or four-digit um, Submariner. And I think that that's actually quite great because you're getting best of both worlds. You get a vintage beauty, um, you get the vintage stunner, and you get a modern bracelet that makes for great everyday wear, and you can wear it with casual abandon. I will return to the Sea Dweller in a minute, but I want to get to some of these points. Jay with D says, untimely meditations. What are your thoughts about revivals? Essentially, a new manufacturer taking the name of a historical manufacturer, but not having real linkage, like Moritz Grossmann. We talked about Chapek earlier. Um, I try. Look, we have started with talking about my romanticism about the Explorer lineup watches in Rolex. So I'm not immune to some of these stories, uh, a lot of which are mythical, if not entirely fictional. But when it comes to a lot of the so-called Phoenix brands, a lot of a lot of the revivals, as you called it, whether we are talking about Chapek, Moritz Grossmann, or A. Lange und Söhne, which rose out of a real heritage, but it wasn't really a high horology brand before World War II, right? They made some exceptional um, pocket watches and some interesting Flieger Uhr, um, but it's not. It wasn't the A. Lange und Söhne of today, right? When Walter Lange left it at the end of Second World War. So whatever Fliegeruhren they made, or whatever pocket watches they made, whatever pilot's watches they made in the past, wasn't really part of this heritage. It's something different. And when it comes to that, I try to value the present over the past. So I look at what the brands are doing today, what Czepek produces today, what Lange produces today, what Moritz Grossmann produces today, and I just go with that. I base my opinions on that. Um, with Lange, I did a video about this too. I actually find the story quite inspirational, right? Especially as it intersects with the Dresden Opera House, um, because you have the story of a brand that gets resurrected from its ashes, and finds inspiration in certain elements of design from the Semperoper, the Dresden Opera House, that it um, carries into its own design language. So it somehow made me care a little more about the brand in that way. But what I cherish most about Lange is what they do currently, right? How they assemble their watches, how they hand finish every element of their movements, how they design the entire architecture of those movements so carefully and thoughtfully. Marco well said, albeit I know very little of Vacheron Constantin. Marco said, it's okay. I don't want overseas. I want Historique 1942 or Corne de Vache. That's that's another watch that I really love. Like a Corne de Vache in platinum. Poof, that's like the ultimate flex piece. I'd love to have one. Um, and user unknown is talking about spider dials. Yeah, I mean that's just nonsense. I can't believe they made that a thing. Um, I keep saying that too. It's not always wrong. Um, it's not always wrong to give up on certain vintage watches. Um, when it's over 50 years, you might have one or two examples that have survived in their perfectly imperfect way. You might have, three or four others that are in honest but well worn condition. And of the rest of it, which is like the half of it, the remaining four or five, hey, it's okay. It's okay to keep them as they are, perhaps as a sort of museum piece of some sort, of visual interest, of educational interest. And it's okay to service and modernize maybe one or two out of that 10, right? If the dial is done, replace it with something that is working. If the hands are completely rotten and you can't find something period correct to replace them, don't give me skeletonized Rolex hands, right? Put something serviceable and usable in their stead. um, if the bracelet is falling apart, by all means include it in the set, but give me the most modern bracelet that fits properly with the watch. Why not? I don't think it's blasphemy to make everyday pieces out of certain vintage models if the condition in which they survived is not acceptable. Don't try to sell damaged dials as something exotic. It's it's just dishonest at some level. User unknown says you're right about dial damage. It's become a way for some to merely charge more. It is. It's exactly that way, unfortunately. Um, did I miss anything in the meantime? I remember there was like almost like an irresistible deal on like a platinum Conde de Vache, but it must have sold already. I want to see if maybe there's something still similar to it on Chrono 24. No, I mean that was just too cheap. But here we are. Let's go to Vacheron's own website. I mean, still, of course, knocking $10,000 off from a piece like this doesn't sound so bad. But this is the platinum version, listed at 73,000. It's just a thing of beauty, enough of a touch of blue in the on the dial, right? For the tachymeter, of course, the heat blued hand for the 30-minute totalizer, as well as the chronograph seconds, um, a tasteful navy blue crocodile strap to match all that. Of course, those stylized lugs that are such an incredible aesthetic signature for Vacheron Constantin, old school pushers, and that incredible balance of the dial. The two registers, 12 Roman, 6 Roman. Man, what a piece. What a piece. And they offer this, of course, in in various metals. Let's go to the historique collection. Um, 1955 Conde de Vache. They have it in steel. They have it in pink gold, and I think platinum. That's it. Yeah. Or maybe the steel was just the special edition they did. No, no, they have it. 43.3. Yeah, and they had a special edition with Hodinki at a certain point in steel. That was an interesting watch as well. I think they just carried that into their line, didn't they? Or is there a difference between these two? Minimal, if there is. Marco would be able to tell us probably if there's a difference between the Hodinky edition of the Steel Conde Vache 1955, and the Steel Chrono they currently have in their lineup, in their historique lineup. Previously, speaking of explorers, did you see the vintage worn post of blackout Tiffany dial Explorer 14270? I have not actually. Let's check it out. I mean, there's sometimes it's excessive, you know, all these accounts that I have on Instagram, all these accounts that I follow on Instagram, and most of it is watches, but um, there's a lot of boxing and sports there, some news, and then of course very important public personalities that we also know as Instagram models as well. So it's a very important place of research for me, and I haven't seen the 14 to 70 that vintage worn posted. Was it from a few days ago or is it in the stories? Let me see his website. Maybe it's there. Oh yeah, it's in the website. Posted last month. Yeah. Let's see. Here we go. Wow. Mm, great. Yeah, it's the 369 in white gold, and of course, uh, the luminous material being tritium. It's expired as well, of course, which makes it a real blackout. Wow. And I kind of like the cognitive dissonance between what we have depicted um, as a tool watch, right, combined with the Tiffany double branding, and it's actually quite nice, and it does give me more cannon fodder in saying, hey, this is actually a very versatile watch in the sense that it can also work in contexts that seem to demand a quote unquote proper wristwatch. You know, the proportions, the minimalist design, the blackout aspect, of course, in this case, all of these are in favor of making the Rolex Explorer also um, available and very usable in more dressed up, in more formal contexts. Possibly the rarest configuration of Explorer ever, save for the Albino 1016. We can bring that up in a moment. It's on the website, posted last month. Surprisingly, no one has picked it up yet. What's the price tag, I wonder? I'd wager less than a dozen of those exist. One sold 4 years ago at auction, but otherwise no trace of it online. Yeah, there are those rare birds. I was just looking at platinum Breguet Type 20 with a salmon dial, and I just figured out that there are only 90 pieces of it made ever. Um, oh yeah, this is almost $50,000. User unknown. I'm not that surprised suddenly why no one has picked it up. I mean, I understand it's a very rare watch. It's a very rare piece, and anything with Tiffany writing on the dial will command an important premium, especially these days. But still, you know, I understand that it didn't find an instant buyer. The albino 1016 is, of course, the Rolex Explorer, the 1016 reference with white dial. These white dial uh, Explorers and GMT Masters are so rare that sometimes their origins are contested, that those um, their existence is deemed apocryphal, so to speak. But um, I think in this case we have a real one in our hands, and they're extremely rare, of course. And um, within the perspective of that story of the polar dial that I just told you, both in terms of the 1950s Oyster Perpetual with the white dial that has accompanied some members of the 1953 British expedition to Mount Everest, and the Polar White Dial Explorer 2 that has accompanied Erling Kage in his expedition to the North Pole and to the South Pole and to Mount Everest. Um, all those stories, of course, make a white dial explorer so attractive and so desirable also for a 70th anniversary Explorer watch. Rolex, make it happen. Make it happen. 2023 should be the real, uh, 2023 should mark the return of a white dial Explorer in the traditional size of 36 millimeters. And there we go. How great would it be? We are at the same wavelength, user unknown. How great would it be for Rolex to release their first all precious metal Explorer with a white dial? Yeah, look, I mean, if they're gonna make it an anniversary edition, and they somehow imagine like a white gold um, Explorer 36 with a white dial. Whew, that would be a killer watch. And Jay with D says a Polar Dial Explorer. Oh wow, that's awesome. Yeah, it would be awesome. Simpatico, yes. It would be awesome as as an anniversary edition as well, and it's quite awesome in the rare examples in which it exists historically. Um, it's a fascinating piece of history, and also resonates with a lot of visual aspects and a lot of horological connections with that history of ascending Mount Everest. So yeah, imagine they did a if they did a precious metal explorer, and I think it would really complete that lineup, which I think is already amazing. Um, I know it didn't find many takers, but I actually like the two tone explorer. Um, I also loved seeing Mr. Nick Fox wearing it and enjoying it. That seems to be one of his favorite modern watches, which I loved. Um, and in a way, it didn't surprise me because if you know Nick Fox a little bit, um, you know that he's a man of very eclectic and eccentric taste and great conversation too, of course. Check out his channel, by the way, called Fox and Sons. It's probably one of the best um, channels on YouTube, in my estimation. Um, it's not as popular as it should be, as it needs to be. Um, but it's basically a channel that he founded with his two sons, um, one of whom accompanies him on the camera, and the other one is behind the camera, and they basically smoke cigars and talk about random stuff. And it's again, Fox is a great conversationalist, so it just flows. And the one liners and the jokes and the dry sense of humor, as well as the general breadth of worldly knowledge that you can gain from those conversations, make that channel very unique and a beautiful resource for anyone and everyone. Jay with D says 2:30 a.m. on East Coast. Hey, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you so much for upvoting the stream. Thank you for being part of the conversation. Must turn in. Cheers to all. Good night, Jay with D. And user unknown says enjoy their collaborations with Kirby Allison. Absolutely, absolutely. But on their own too, they're amazing. And if you like cigars, and if you're a little bit interested in clothes and over accessorizing, right? Clearly, Nick Fox is a man of style, but he he heard and absolutely resisted Coco Chanel's advice. You know, where it said that uh, she said that before you step out of the house, look at yourself in the mirror and take off one accessory. And Nick Fox, probably before he goes out of the house, he takes a look in the mirror and puts on another ring, or adds another fob, to his lapel, or something like that. Ties another knot and another handkerchief around his neck. But the man is amazing. Let me see if I can find a photo of him wearing the Explorer two tone. Actually, I would have to dig into the videos again and actually do a screen capture myself. Um, oh, I can't find it easily. I think he may have worn it, if I remember, to the interview he does with Baya Talk. But anyway, at least for for those of you who are not familiar with his blessed face, this is Nick Fox wearing a beautiful velvet shawl color smoking jacket. Um, and there we have him in lovely tweed three-piece suit. But you kind of know what I mean, with that uh, bracelet and the rings, and of course, the highly stylized glasses. The pocket silk is never missing. Always wears a watch. He's great. Again, not someone I necessarily emulate, but certainly someone who inspires. at least in terms of his outlook on life, on style. Great, great guy. All right. Well, guys, with that being said, I think I might take off myself. I'm going to post the link once again if anyone wants to jump on board and have a little bit of chat, maybe for the last half hour. But if not, I will probably take off for the day, and I will return at 7:30 um, with the same show, the Late Show with Lord Hellespont the Fifth, your favorite pseudo intellectual, and Joe Pesci. According to Joe Pesci, also gender fluid person. He asks, "Do you play ball for the other team? Do you like men, sir?" Um, no comment. I think there's only one team. It shouldn't matter. Why would it matter? Unless you are coming on to me, in which case I welcome it. Slide into my DMs on Instagram, and I'm sure we can make something happen, Joe. And user unknown says, enjoyed it. Have a good evening. And JB, nice to be with you guys. Um, hey, thank you for being here. Thank you for your support and presence. Whatever team you play for, my Instagram is Old New England. And I'm going to drop a link right there in the chat. Follow me on Instagram, slide into my DMs. Um, I would appreciate it. And if you haven't subscribed here, please do so and like the stream. It really helps. It helps me gain more exposure as I'm trying to make my way to 1,000 subs and get this channel monetized. And hey, ultimately, I enjoy being here with you. I enjoy sharing my passion and knowledge of wristwatches. But if you want to support the channel, if you want to encourage the work I do in this channel in the manner of content about uh, all variety of wristwatch makers, feel free to consider a PayPal contribution, lordhellespontv@gmail.com, lordhellespontv@gmail.com. And I also have a Cash App, $LHVVV, $LHVVV. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being in my audience. I appreciate you all. I love you all. Please continue engaging, continue being here. I'll be here tomorrow at the same time, 7:30 Pacific Daylight Savings Time, 10:30 on the East Coast. And wherever you are, I'll be happy to accompany you in your journey through time. Until next time, friends, I bid you adieu. See you in the next one.